Hello and welcome to the Catholic Mama podcast. I'm your host, Christine Flynn. Thanks for joining me on this episode where I'm also joined by Joel Trumbo, who is a Catholic husband, father of 8, a bookbinder, and working on this really cool project called the Tamburn Gospels, which we're going to talk about today. It's about illuminated manuscripts, and I'm sure if you can't visualize it in my head, I'm sure that Joel, you can explain it a little bit more as the podcast goes on. But it's this really beautiful Celtic style that's ancient and lost for the most part, except when you see it on, gosh, there was a movie a couple years ago that they had this in the style of the Celtic images and everything. I can't think of it now, but you don't see it very often. So we're going to talk about that today. It's a very cool project. But first, Joel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So that's a super brief introduction because everybody likes to hear from the guests more than me. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Okay. So I came to bookbinding and illumination and stuff by a very weird path. I started out, I was a military guy for 11 years. I enlisted in the Navy first because I thought it'd be really cool to be a Navy SEAL. And I went to Navy SEAL training in 2003 and I got injured and dropped from training. It was a heat injury, and the way the Navy works is they don't let you basically do anything fun if you've had any kind of heat injury. So I got stuck on a ship, which I really didn't like. So I don't want to talk bad about the Navy. I know a lot of people appreciate that, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I was very much biding my time. And then the Army didn't have the same types of medical hangups that the Navy did. And I said, I had a heat stroke. And they're like, that's fine. You can come on over and have as many heat strokes as you want. So I switched over to the Army. And I went through Ranger selection and I got assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion. So I did 6 deployments total, 2 in the Navy and then 4 in the Army, 4 as a Ranger. Then I got out and I worked basically mobile security for State Department for a while in Baghdad and Africa. And so I've pretty much most of my married life, I've been away overseas for 6 to 9 months out of the year. And then 4 years ago, I was in Africa and my children go to a little private school in Front Royal. And we'd always homeschooled my children before they started attending there. I was very much tried to be as involved as I could in their homeschooling because classical education and all that is very important to me. But obviously being overseas all the time is very difficult. So I would write lessons for them and things like that while I was overseas. So we found a really awesome school, Divinum Auxilium Academy in Front Royal. My kids went there, and then they needed a grammar teacher for the middle school, and I had never taught before besides the homeschooling, but I would have my own sons in my class, so it seemed like a really interesting opportunity. I wanted to teach, so I switched over 4 years ago and I started teaching middle school. So basically spent the last 15 or 16 years running and gunning overseas, and now I teach middle school.
But slight difference.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap with some of the skill sets, dealing with insurgents, and I have an all boys class of middle schoolers this year. So there's a little bit of carryover. But so along the way, I've always been really fascinated by illuminated manuscripts, medieval books. And I was homeschooled all the way up my whole life. And so doing the art styles of those medieval books is something I've always done for fun as a hobby. And I would do overseas. I'd be in my tent. I'd be reading the church fathers, and I'd be doing, illuminations and stuff like that.
So that's a better way than I think probably a lot of the guys are spending their free time. So that's good.
Well, a lot of the guys in my platoon definitely thought I was pretty weird, but I enjoyed it. So it's something I've always really been into and enjoyed. And then, so once I switched over and started teaching, I'd been along the way, I'd gone to art school and I'd studied calligraphy and bookbinding and, excuse me. So when I started teaching, I needed to do a little something extra to kind of help supplement the bills going from the one to the other. So I started bookbinding. Well, it had been a hobby of mine, but I did it as a business at that point, kind of a side business. And so I've been doing that for about 40 years now. And my specialty is like medieval style leather bound books. I got into the leather binding because of the illumination, because I was actually into illuminating way back when I was like 12. I would do all these designs and stuff like that. And I always thought it'd be really cool to do an entire illuminated book like they used to do. There's a lot of
Right.
calligraphers and artists who specialize in these kinds of art forms. I mean, you can find Celtic artists, you can find really great illuminators and manuscript, people who do that art form, but it's really rare. And nobody that I know of has really done what they did in the medieval period, which is adapting it for an entire book. It's usually like a standalone piece or something
Sure.
like
Yeah.
that. And it always seemed to me that with the technology we have with digital technology, and I can print things and stuff like that. So if I can do the art, I could actually illuminate a book, and then I can have a book, an illuminated book that's printed. So
not copying every single page over
right.
and over
Yes.
again. Like,
So that's a disclaimer.
yeah.
I'm not handwriting everybody's 400-page book, but
That's a fair thing. I can't imagine anybody having that time. That's why the printing press.
no
God bless
time
the
for that.
printing press. Yeah.
Right. But I feel like we can overlap them. We can use the things we have and the tools we have to be able to continue those traditions of the art forms. We can also make really awesome, incredible books, and that's what I've wanted to do. So the Illuminated Gospels is a project I've wanted to do for a long time, many years, but I never really went for it because it seemed like such a big time commitment. And so I would
Sure.
just kind of like, work on a little piece here or there, or doodle something here or there, but I never really committed to it. And this year I decided, let's go ahead and just knock it out and actually go whole hog and finish up the gospel. So at this point, I'm a little over a quarter of the way done with the art. I'm doing all 4 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm doing it so the book is going to be in Latin, the Vulgate Latin, which is what the original texts were written in and illuminated around the Latin text. And then each page, it's also going to have an English, a Dewey Reams English translation kind of out towards the margin. So it'll be bilingual, Latin and English. And
That's beautiful.
uh,
I took a look at some of the pictures. I know it's on Kickstarter, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But it looks exactly like what you expect if you're familiar with the Book of Kells. I mean, the colors are great, which is something that you don't get to see in some of the old prints because it's faded over time, or they didn't have the pigments. But the colors are
100-year-old books.
Yeah, there's some slight fading on that, but the pigmentation is so vibrant. And it's so clear. It really is. I mean, it's a work of art, which that, but maybe you don't, again, we see it. I've seen, one, 8 by 11 inch prints of this sort of thing, but to know that a whole book, and I was checking out the leather bound books that you bind, it just exudes this ancient feel to it, which is pretty cool because we're in a world. I mean, look, we're on electronics now. We have so many synthetic materials around us that it's great to actually have something natural to touch.
That's really why I got into all that kind of thing, because that's always been very much a part of my personality as a homeschool kid. Like, I was kind of a cross between a nerdy guy, but I also was training all the time. I wanted to be in the military. So I grew up at a boarding school, and there was a library at the boarding school. My dad was a teacher there, resident faculty. So I've spent a lot of time in the library, as any good homeschool kid would do. I do lots of reading. And I came across, I remember, I don't know how this happened, and I don't blame my parents for this, but somehow or another, I was fairly old before I ever really got into Tolkien and Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
I don't know how that happened, because they're big Tolkien people. I don't know. Maybe they did get me into that, and I just, went in one ear out the other. But I remember going through the stacks at the library, and I never really went in the fiction section. I wasn't interested in fiction, but I remember wandering through there and kind of looking around at all the paperback books. And there was one book sitting there on the shelf, and it was I think it was the 50th anniversary edition of The Hobbit. I don't know if you've ever seen those. It was a particular one they did, but it's like a gold leather cover, and it had the green runic inscriptions on it. And I didn't know what it was. I just saw that book sitting there. I was like, what is that? I took it. I was like, I can check this thing out. And I didn't really know what it was, but it was the aesthetic of the book. Like, it was so magical to me. It was so exciting. And so I've had that my whole life. I took it home and read it. And that idea of I don't know, there's something really visceral about those kinds of things, the illuminated books or the old, leather bound tomes it's always been really exciting and compelling to me. And
Yeah.
I feel like, especially if you have a book like sacred scripture or something like that, they should be, they should be something that inspires awe and
Right.
imagination,
And
especially in young people. Like, you should
yeah.
want to pick up that book and feel like it's something really special.
Yeah. And, we have, look, we got beautiful Bibles around the house. The Word on Fire one, it's really nice looking. But at the same time, there's so much we've just become so used to um, how plentiful books are or the way they look. And
Hmm.
it strips some of the awe away from what is owed to God. So I think if
Yeah.
you bring it back, it stops you for a second, right? And then like, what is this? And you can look at all of this in a new way. And especially, I mean, gosh, there's such a hunger for the Latin texts now to have that side by side with the English in this really cool form of artwork that you don't really see, and especially not in that length,
Right.
is really eye catching.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I especially like about those old books, and I include kind of the whole spectrum of the period of illuminated manuscripts, which was around about a really 600-year period that was a major industry, the handmade books before the printing press. And one of the things, especially with the older ones you get into, is how intense the decoration is. But it's not, now with the Celtic stuff, it's very ethnic, it's definitely, they're using a lot of really old sort of ancestral art forms, and they're adapting it to the Christian, their
Right.
Christianized culture now. But it's a lot of stuff you see even in the art forms from before they were Christianized. They've adapted it to that. But it's just incredibly vibrant, and it's so full of decor. It creates an entire space, visual context for the
Mhm.
book itself, for the text. And so when I'm doing the art, it's incredibly meditative to do that. But even looking at it, I think that's a good part of the purpose of it. In the Benedictine tradition, which was quite dominant at the time, of course, you have Lectio Divina, which is the whole method of reading a book, which, like you said, we very much tend to approach books with a kind of a subconscious consumerist idea, like, how
Right.
much can I read today or this year, or I read this quantity. And in Lectio Divina, and especially when books were such a rare and precious commodity, to sit down with, one page, one chapter, one verse even, and really ruminate on it, really kind of. And so a lot of I have a sketch here I'm working on, I can kind of show you, but a lot of the pages in the Gospels, they would have something like this. They would have an entire page, and you see, this is the whole text on this page is two words here. So it's designed to draw your attention and your focus into, to really sit with the words, to not rush
Yeah.
through it, but um, to enjoy it, and
Yeah.
to really go deeply into it.
Almost looks like a blend between Lectio Divina and meditating on sacred or praying on sacred art, which is
Hmm.
great. The two in one, get more
Yeah, and
senses
they
involved.
completely over intertwine, just like the art form does. The
Yeah.
letters become the art, and a lot of these, they'll have an entire word, a big word, and that's part of the art of the page, is that word is kind of made into a decoration as well. It's really interesting.
So I was thinking as you're talking, a couple of years back I had uh, Rachel Fulton Brown, who was, I don't know if she still is, but she was a medieval history professor at the
I'm friends with
University of
her.
Chicago. Oh,
Familiar.
you are? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was going to say, you probably love hearing from
Mhm.
her, but she was on talking about her study of Mary from a medieval perspective, actually converted her.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you hear medieval, for listeners, hopefully, maybe if you're not a history buff, it's not the Dark Ages.
No.
It's actually a great time for our faith tradition. The
Hmm.
Renaissance is debauchery and stuff, but the Middle Ages is very fascinating because you get this. I don't know. You get these kinds of intrigue. Now, of course, the big lights and big pictures of the Renaissance order that came after, amazing. But there is the Benedictine traditions that were very ripe at the time. or just this more the meditative approaches to our faith, and the scholars that came out of that time. I mean, you get so much. It almost seems to me that the medieval period just focused so much on the intricacies of our faith. It shows up in things like the illuminated texts, right? They
Yeah.
spent so much time on understanding, the scholars at least spent so much time understanding so much of the faith. It just kind of seeped into everything, and you could see it in the artwork or the illuminated texts. So
Well,
it's
their whole
very cool
culture
stuff.
was completely shot through with that aesthetic, and their love of the sacred, and their imaginative worldview. You see that in the books. You see that all over the place. All the cathedrals they built, the things that they would work on for 120 years, and the people who contributed the money and started the process knew they would never see that in their lifetime. They were totally bound up in these great works that were supposed to be sort of a monument to the glory of their faith. And you see that all throughout the period, for all the
Yeah.
faults. Like that's one thing they certainly had, absolutely everywhere. And you see it expressed in everything, from even the common art and sort of the common culture, how much the feast days of the church and things like that influence the day-to-day life of the regular folks, all the way up to the books the scholars made and they were reading, and the churches that people were praying in. Everything was imbued with this sense of the imminence, the
Mhm.
immediacy of the sacred and the divine, that it's right here, it's right around this corner, like it's in this room,
Right.
it's in
Let's
this
bring
book.
that back.
Yeah.
Let's bring that back. We'll start with your book. We'll
Yeah.
start there. So, we've talked about the book, the project itself. Now, what's happening on Kickstarter right now?
So in the last 2 days, the response has been really, really tremendous. Last 2 days, we've met the funding goal. I still have, I think, 27 days left.
Oh, wow.
You have to
Congratulations.
thank you. You have to do kind of a set period, for a fundraiser. I've never done a Kickstarter like that before, so I wasn't exactly sure how that would go, but the response was really tremendous. So we met our funding goal, and a lot of the books, I had 100 books kind of earmarked for when it's finished. I'm gonna be doing leather-bound books, and 100,
Okay.
I think, kind of like the upper limit of what I can actually produce. So I set the number at that, and those I think there's only a couple left. Those have gone. A lot of
Wow.
people have been reserving those. So the Kickstarter is fully funded. There's some other rewards available on there. We still have a couple more weeks left with it, but it's been really
Okay.
great. But
So well, I'll put the link, but for anybody, if you're not nearby, you can go to Kickstarter and just search for Tamburn Gospels.
mhm,
Again, I'll put the link. I was looking at, because I know some of the bonuses include coloring sheets of your
mhm,
original artwork, and I was looking, I was like, what a better thing to color. Years ago, I used to work in market research for a multimedia retailer, and everybody was excited because book sales were going up again. And it turns out that it was just adult coloring books,
right.
and what people weren't actually reading. And it's a lot of it is just mandalas or Eastern woo-woo stuff, new agey designs. It was
Mm,
so refreshing to see a coloring page that
yeah.
includes sacred art from our faith tradition.
Well, that's something I really wanted to do with it, because what got me into it, like I said, when I was young, I mean, I was a 12-year-old, and I was just captivated by the art, and I wanted to make it. And of course, it took a long time to really learn how to do that. But with young people, of course, I'm a teacher, so I do bookbinding and illumination and stuff with my middle schoolers. They put together, they're doing an illuminated book this year, but it's a coloring book, so it's a full book, and it's illuminated, but there's no color with it. So once they
Okay.
have their book, they get to actually color it in. And so it's like a coloring book, but it's not just a book of pictures, it's an actual book. And when they're finished coloring it, I did a book of hours like that. And so when they color it, they actually have like a colored illuminated book that they have done, but they don't have to
Awesome.
come up with all the art for it. And I thought that would be a really great way to use those art forms, and especially with younger people, to introduce them to those traditions, those styles, to get them interested in it. And like you said, just because it is meditative and it's entertaining, pretty much everyone likes coloring. My daughter's obsessed with it. I have a 6-year-old, and anytime I'm working on something, she'll come bug me and be like, do you have a coloring page ready for me? I'm
Oh.
like, "Not yet." a lot of times once I finish one, I'll run off a copy for her and she'll go color it. So she's always waiting for me to finish the next one.
Yeah, well, I guarantee you give any adult fresh crayons. I have a feeling they would color with those.
Definitely. Well, for something like this, I mean, if you get the real nice art markers, you can get really vibrant colors and get it really popping.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just actually saw I painted some peg dolls of Advent saints for one of my children for Christmas. And I don't usually go down that section of the craft store, but when I saw the art markers, and I know so many people who like to journal on the sides of their Bibles and everything, and maybe I'll do that. It would look like a crummy cartoon, but it would be nice colors.
Yeah.
Got to start somewhere.
I think a lot of especially with the later illuminated manuscripts, a lot of the decoration that they put into it it had a number of different reasons, basically, and some things they found from the styles that they use. A lot of it was mnemonic. In other words, they would do these decorations that were designed to help you remember what the page looked like, because a lot of these guys, if you had a book at a monastery, you might get to travel to that monastery and read the book, but you might have one chance to read it, and you got to remember it as much as you can. So they would put in later on. A lot of the decoration was designed. That's how we got like the chapter and verse system was from the medieval period in the Bible, because they were trying to break it up in ways that would be easy for them to memorize. And these guys like train their memory to an incredible degree, but a lot of the decoration even was designed to help that visually. So later on, you'll see like these weird illuminations of like snails hunting rabbits or something like that. Or kind of like the Monty Python thing, the guy, with the trumpet in his butt, like they put stuff like that in the Psalter. And it's not just like, some juvenile delinquent monk in there, like, but it actually had a purpose because of the way the mind remembers things. You remember like those kind of outlandish pictures that helps you have a mental visual representation of the text.
I see that. So a friend of ours, Kevin Vost, is a prolific author on the faith, and he has a book called Memorizing the Faith, and a lot of it is creating, like, I think in his one of that Memorize the Faith book, I think he might just be giving examples for the 10 commandments, and it's a house, but as you're going through, he walks you through the whole mental imagery of it, and some of the images, you have to go through the whole process, but then it makes sense. Right. Otherwise you're like, what?
Yeah, the method of Loki. You have to make outlandish mental images because those stick out in your mind.
That's right.
Easy to remember.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I will put the link in the show notes for the Tamburn Gospels on Kickstarter. I was going to say on Instagram, we talked about this a little bit before we hit record. Besides this medieval style of illumination and your bookbinding, you are living a more wild kind of existence out in Virginia. It looks like.
Trying to, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So is this stuff that, is this like a homeschooling thing, or was this being in the military for so long? I'm just always curious when I see these kinds of lifestyles. We're suburban folks, so I aspire to that.
I think it's mostly personality stuff. I think if I was not a father of 8 and a husband, I'd probably be a monk. Like, I want to live in the woods and have things simple.
Yeah. So now you drag everybody else along with it.
The military appealed to me for that reason. It was very stringent. It's very austere in many ways. And I just always appreciated that. And I wanted to live like that. I want my kids to grow up experiencing the outdoors, experiencing beauty, not to be sort of wrapped up in just pop culture and consumerism, but to have something better, behind them as they're growing up. So
awesome. So on Insta, somebody had shared your project with me on Instagram, which is how I came across it. And so if anybody's on Instagram listening, where can they find you there?
It's just at Tamburn Bindery.
Okay.
On Instagram.
I'll put that link in the show notes as well, because you get a nice mix between these beautiful books you're binding and then these cool things you're doing with your family. Yeah.
Well, I'm not super great at updating my social media and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm not really much of an online guy, but as I go forward, a lot of my updates, I will be putting them on there. And that is where I'm going to try to do a better job throughout this process of staying on top of that and updating.
That's all right.
that. So
I know it's there's real life outside of the phone. but
yeah. Plus, I just don't really like it. So
yeah. I have
more of an obligation.
I know the Catholic corner of Instagram, the real Catholics, not the others. That's a really great place to be. So
Yeah.
great company that you'll be in there when you, but yeah, I hear you. It's yeah, rather be out doing the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
cool. Joel, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Again, I'll put all the show notes in, or sorry, the links in the show notes. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Until next time.